Good day, everybody. Randy Franklin Smith here, and today we're talking about privileged password management, and really more importantly and more to the point, privileged session management. Really big difference between them. And there's different ways to do privileged session management. We're going to talk about those, and we're going to focus on what I'm calling protocol level proxy privileged session management. So today's webinar is made possible by Beyond Trust, and I've gotten Martin here with me. Martin, thanks for helping me develop today's Real Training for Free session, and thanks to you and the other folks like Sarah at Beyond Trust that makes such great topics possible.
Good to be here.
Okay, so first of all, we will just level set on the risks that we're trying to address, and then we will compare privileged password management to privileged session management. And then we're going to compare two of the main ways that you see privileged session management done. So in terms of risks, I've divided these up into maybe 3 different categories. And again, folks, please use the question window for any and all feedback, not just questions, but we want to hear anything from you. In fact, I want to ask you guys a question right now, and you can use the poll to answer it. What stage are you in with how you're handling privileged account management? But to the risks here, you know, there's what I call the classic risks that Martin, I've been talking to people about for, seriously, this is crazy, 20 years. 20 years ago I started writing about information security, and I started doing courses on information security and compliance after running an information security team for some time. And we were talking about this stuff all the way back then, 20 years ago. And it's still relevant today, the classic risks of things like, you know, static passwords, our most important passwords tending not to get changed, shared accounts, lots of people using root or administrator, widely known passwords among administrators, and let's see here, did my screen sharing stop?
No, I think it's still showing.
Okay, all right, you know, when administrators leave, oh my goodness, it's either we disrupt the entire world or we just live with the risk of unchanged passwords, right? And there's also the issue of systems that are monolithic. Not, you know, Windows and Active Directory do a pretty good job of least privilege. We've done a lot of webinars with you guys on how Linux does not support least privilege among admins out of the box without something like sudo. And then there's other things like routers and switches and wireless access points and so on. There's no concept of least privilege with them. So, you know, these are all of the classic risks associated with privileged accounts. But that stuff's been around forever, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
It's still as relevant now as what it has always been, but I think the bigger, more important thing maybe to talk about today are the newer risks. So pass the hash, and I always say, besides pass the hash, you know, any kind of credential artifact risk, because there's so many ways for credentials to get stolen. And along with that, I think we need to just operate under the assumption of compromised workstations. There's just so many instances and cases, even widely known in the media, that just show that workstations are getting infected all the time. There's just no limit to the ways that the bad guys come up with for accomplishing that. And then given the fact that workstations are so filthy by that I mean in terms of the content that they process and parse from the internet. It just leads to where you're better off assuming and building out your high security controls under the assumption that workstations are compromised. What do you think about that, Martin?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point because ultimately, it's not. I mean, you can treat a workstation, as or any sort of server that somebody tries to compromise and say, okay, we're going to look at that in isolation. But it's where a user can go beyond that. I mean, it's really. It's not just, sort of, I mean, if you look at vulnerabilities, that might be present, or, I mean, it could even be something where, it's like an insider threat. You don't know who's been there before, and you don't know who's, going to go there after you, potentially. So, as you say, you really always got to assume that, that your stuff isn't going to be safe in there.
Yeah, in fact, let's just skip ahead for a second and talk about this issue of assuming workstations are compromised, even administrator workstations, and credential artifact harvesting, because you were referring to the timeline there, Martin. So we've got a workstation, whether it's an end user or an admin. At some point in time, it gets infected with, it gets compromised. And, I would say malware, but now folks are talking about non-malware attacks, which it's not my favorite way of referring to it because there's still malware on the system. It's just running in memory. So I think a better way to talk about it is fileless attacks. But regardless, the point is someone has control of this endpoint, of this workstation. Now, what is really interesting is it's not just a risk in terms of who logs on subsequent to that infection, and we can all appreciate that. What if we install what if the bad guy installs a keyboard logger on that system? So then we wait around for someone, especially hopefully an admin or another privileged user, to log onto that system. We capture their credentials. So that's been around forever. We understand that risk. And by the way, right before this webinar, I just saw a headline about a keystroke logger being found in an HP audio device driver. I don't know if you saw that, Martin, but case in point, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So on the timeline, of course, we have to worry about who logs on after the infection or compromise, but with credential artifact risks, the bad guy actually gets to go back in time and say, who logged onto the system before? Are there any credential artifacts out there? Grab them, use them, and so on. So all of this is what's made it really difficult in recent years to shut down the lateral movement of bad guys. And that's what ultimately allows them to cross security zones, because most of the time the initial compromise is on some quote-unquote low-value endpoint, of some end user, maybe somebody in HR. But before you know it, those guys the bad guys have spread from endpoint to endpoint and eventually gotten admin authority. So how do they do that? Well, they've been able to cross security zones between systems, and sometimes that's exacerbated by the fact that there are not well-defined security zones. Like one zone that I would be referring to would be systems devoted to hosting your quote-unquote red forest. Okay, so then there's also risks we're concerned about. Once an admin establishes a privileged session, what are they doing during that session? Can we monitor it? Can we enforce accountability? Because maybe, Martin, we've done a great job with guarding access to this root account. But once we give Billy access to the root account to work a ticket, then he's got the keys to the kingdom. What does he do while he's logged on? And it's not just having a video of what he did, is it?
No, absolutely. I mean, you need to be able to, look for anomalies. So you've got to be able to look at the keystrokes. You also got to be able to search not only what the user typed, but what they saw, because most of the time it's not even just like malicious activity you're protecting against, but it's also, when I say malicious activity, like destructive stuff. But it could be someone harvesting information. You could be taking private medical information. You could be stealing credit card numbers. And if that stuff gets compromised, unless you're actually recording, though, what the user actually sees and is searchable, then obviously it makes it difficult to find. So it's definitely important to be able to see all aspects of that session.
So in addition to having a video and having pixels that a human can look at, it comes down to metadata. We need to be able to capture as much metadata as we can during that session. We'll talk about that more. But those are the risks that we're trying to address today and what we're going through. So we started off in the industry with saying, okay, we need to do privileged password management. Let's take all of these passwords of privileged accounts and put them in some kind of vault or safe. And so now that system, the PPM, manages all of those passwords. It stores the passwords. It changes the passwords on target systems. Maybe it changes the password every time the account is checked out, or better yet, every time the account is checked back in, so that keeps the password a moving target. That does help with things like credential artifact harvesting, because even if the credential is an artifact of it is left out there somewhere, if you can ensure that the password's been changed since then the artifact is no good anymore. So password management alone is a good thing. A PPM also facilitates checkout and approvals, and it gives you an audit trail at least of who had access to what account at what time. So what we mean by that is that Bob had access to the root account on Linux server 21 or something like that. But it stops there. We don't know what Bob did during that time, and the other issue is that the admin gets the password, and it's not just that we don't trust the admin. Maybe our admins are perfectly trustworthy and so on. They're never going to go rogue on us. But if the admin knows the password, then it also means that the admin's endpoint, the admin's workstation, knows the password also. And that is the bigger deal, as we'll develop more as we go along. So the advantage to just a classic privileged password management system, Martin, is that the admin doesn't have to change anything. After he gets the password out of the password vault, he gets to keep doing work the way he's done it for years, right? Maybe he doesn't want to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so, most users are, human beings are fickle things. Myself included, and we all like to get into a routine of working and the way that we work. And so, inevitably, administrators tend to work in a particular manner. Even though their jobs might be dynamic in terms of the type of work that they're doing. And so, that they have certain tools they prefer, they have certain ways of working, and being able to get a password means that you're just working exactly the same way as you did before. So rather than getting the post-it note from under your desk or whatever, or pulling up your Excel spreadsheet, you're giving the password and you work. So that's kind of the benefit is in that manner you're rotating it, but at the same time you're not actually changing the way that you work.
Very true. And it's not just, I think I just want to weigh in that it's not just a matter of, human nature and behavior, but, think about all the systems that some admins have to manage. This is probably small for me, but I don't want to have 1 million different remote desktop sessions on my desktop, and I want them organized a little bit. It just makes me more productive, you know. So
Yep.
Productivity is really a thing here too, that admins, you know, find the best tools out there to use, and that's what they want to use. So it's a matter of that as well. So the risks, though, like I said, with privileged password management alone, is the admin still knows the password. That means the password still traverses the workstation of the administrator, and there's no audit trail what happened once he's in there. So think about your password vault here. We've got a list of systems and accounts that we have on those systems. I want to point out one thing that sometimes folks don't realize, Martin, and that is any good privileged password management system or privileged session management system allows you to use namesake accounts, because a lot of times folks come back during my privileged account management webinars and say, well, we don't want people logging onto the server as root or as some generic account that the privileged account management system has, because then we lose accountability with the host-generated logs. And they're absolutely right. I mean, best practice is to preserve that accountability even when you're going through the privileged account management system, right? And so, sure, we can still support generic built-in accounts on those systems. So perhaps we do sometimes have to check out, especially root on a device, because that's the only way you can log on to the device. But Bob underscore user can also have a Bob underscore admin account, so that whatever he does once he's connected to that system is still associated with him directly. Any thoughts on that one, Martin?
No, I mean, you've nailed it. I mean, that's, I mean, really the big way of differentiating the two, you know, is the fact that very often you do want the, you know, the ability to be able to have that accountability within your local logs, because I mean, ultimately that's what's, you know, maybe sent off to your SIM. The downside to that is that increases the amount of administration you've got to do at the back end in terms of policy, because now you've got to do one-to-one user mappings on every device, you know, compared to I'm going to map this group of users to this shared account. So, you know, the trade-off, you know, is obviously, you know, that you're going to do a lot more administration, but you get a lot more accountability. But, I mean, the bottom line is shared accounts, you know, are here to stay, you know, regardless of whether you use, you know, namesake accounts. I mean, they're always going to be there. So I would say you're going to see pretty well both in most organizations.
Right. But there's no requirement to stop using namesake accounts if you classify that as worth the effort and important enough to security. So that's the important thing there. Yeah, there's something else I want to bring out, and that is you really need to understand what's happening with different, when you're looking at different password or privileged account management systems, because there is one product out there, and I just, for the life of me, I cannot remember which one it is, but what impressed me or caused concern for me when I was evaluating it is that it gave me the illusion of keeping the privileged accounts credentials off the endpoint. The admin never saw them, and it looked like it was all transparent in that I would, you know, log onto the web portal, check out the account, and it would open up a session for me. Straight from the web portal, it would open up a session for me on that target system. But in questioning the vendor more, I found out that that credential was actually coming, you know, the credential of the root account, of the target account, was coming back invisibly. It wasn't shown to the admin, it wasn't put in the clipboard, but it was coming back through the workstation and then being used to initiate that connection to the target system. The problem with that is that if it comes through the RAM of your workstation, then it's vulnerable to anything that has compromised that workstation. Andrew, oh, okay, a couple folks are naming a solution out there that that does that. Interesting. Check that out, Martin. So,
yeah.
So that's a pretty big deal that you need to understand. Now, how big of a threat is that? Does it require some advanced coding? Yes. Well, guess what? That advanced coding has already been done. There, you know, Martin, there's so many shrink-wrapped hacker tools out there that scrape the memory of other processes. In fact, wasn't that how the Target credit card breach happened on payment systems?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, you know, you had people sort of break into a a completely unrelated system for heating and ventilation, and they were able to get in and look at information that was there in the memory, and be able to obviously the thing was actually connected to a subnet that then gave access to the rest of the target network, and they were able to traverse their way laterally through the organization. I mean, creating this really, it was a legitimate entry point, but obviously it was maliciously used. But
well,
yeah, I mean, and the issue is very often is people look at the security, they look at vendor security, and they say, oh, you know what, okay, it's SSL protected, and we've got all this information, it's actually protecting the password as it traverses from the server down to the workstation. But then that's just from the life of that. I mean, what is there then another process that's then actually then injecting that into an application? Is that using some sort of macro tool? And is that password being passed in plain text? So it's you've almost got to look at it end to end when you look at this sort of how it can be protected.
Yeah, and here's the thing that I oftentimes say with security is the devil is in the details. You have to get into the weeds. You cannot you cannot accomplish cybersecurity at the executive level. And the thing, just to be clear, that I was getting at with the Target thing is that the whole network lateral movement thing, that's definitely an issue and was a big part of it. But at the end of the day, maybe it was the Home Depot, I don't remember, but one of them, they had developed software that ran in, as a process on the Target, cashier PCs, and it was scraping credit cards out of the RAM, out of the process memory of the payment application. And so if you can scrape credit cards out of memory, then you can scrape passwords out too. And we see it all the time. That's what mimikatz, for instance, is all about. And nowadays mimikatz is implemented by non-file-based PowerShell that just runs completely in memory. So is this a real risk? It absolutely is. This is not science fiction that we're talking about. So what we really want is to maintain, I'm going to use the term chain of custody of that password, Martin, and arm's length usage of it. How about those two terms? That's what's ideal, right? If I'm an admin, I want to keep that password at arm's length. I don't ever want to see it, and I don't want my workstation to touch it. I want to be able to leverage its access to accomplish my work legitimately, but that's it. And so then the privileged account management system keeps the chain of custody of that password and never lets it out under anybody else's control. Michael says, would it be possible to share a couple of tools that would help purge the memory of my computer before I reboot it? So, I don't know, we'll come back and talk about that. That's probably not the biggest risk that you need to be concerned with. Now, let's move on to privileged session management. So privileged password management is one piece. Up until yesterday when we were talking, I had not clearly gotten it into my mind, Martin, that privileged session management is not a adjacent integrated technology. It is a superset of privileged password management, I think, is a better way to look at it. So privileged session management includes your password management, but now we're keeping, if we do PSM right, this is how we keep that chain of custody of the password of these privileged accounts and keep them at arm's length from the admins that are using them. So we'll drill down into this more, but I think just that, I used to draw these as two boxes beside each other, Martin, but I think conceptually it's better to look at PPM as a component of PSM. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, it's one thing to be able to say, yeah, okay, you got password management, you got rotation, and another thing to say, you got session management, the ability for people to be able to log in. But ultimately, what you need to do is, I mean, by combining them, it means that now you're never releasing the password. It means it's just being recycled at the back end. Nobody ever gets to see it, so it just reduces that potential attack surface. Plus, also from the session management perspective, you're not sort of leaving somebody sort of vulnerable to local compromise, like you say, key login tools, or anything that's going to be sort of scraping the memory of credentials that are sent down. So it's being able to sort of combine the two is absolutely critical in my mind.
Great. So privileged password management and improvement, chain of custody is broken. The privileged session management, if it's done right, maintains the chain of custody. The password's never known by the admin, never touches the admin's workstation. But there's two very different ways to do PSM. And these are terms that I've kind of chosen. I'm calling one type, I'm still lingering with the term hosted session, Martin, or it's essentially, it's in some ways a jump box. Some PSM solutions are implemented that way. Others are what I would call a protocol level proxy, and that's what we're talking about with the way you've done it at Beyond Trust. But let's get into these and explain them. So a hosted session jump box. In this case, the admin starts off, we always start off going to the web portal of our privileged account management solution. And, well, we don't always, but at least in this case we do, because there's a cool thing that you guys support called automatic approval rules. But okay, so we start out, the admin says, okay, I need to administer this system over here. Let me get my pointer out. So I need to administer this system. Let me go to the web page of my PAM solution and say, okay, I need root or Bob admin and I want to access this system. And so with a hosted / jump box PSM system, the web portal is going to send back a URL or MIME type that says, hey, Mr. Workstation of the admin, open up our client. So that's whatever client the PSM solution provides. It might be an ActiveX component or a Java application. And here's the coordinates for connecting to our PSM session host. Now, I've shown these as two different physical servers, but they don't have to be. So they're all one vendor solution. And what happens is this is a client provided by the vendor, the PSM vendor, and it uses a protocol, maybe the VNC protocol, to initiate a connection to the privileged session manager host. So now we've got something like a remote desktop connection, but it's maybe VNC. Then within that session, either automatically or through whatever the admin does, another session, completely different, what I would call a nested session, is initiated to the target system, and the credentials plugged in through the office of the privileged session management solution. And that might be an RDP connection to a Windows server or a secure shell server to a Linux system, or really one thing about this type of PSM, Martin, is it could be some other protocol too, right? You could even potentially be running a program like ADUC, Active Directory
Yep.
Users and Computers, on this system. So
Yeah,
it does
absolutely.
give you some flexibility there. But this has some pretty big implications, though. Now, let's be clear. If this type of solution is done right, the password of the account being managed does not come back to the client. It goes from here to here and then is used to initiate that connection. But what we've got are nested sessions. So we're doing RDP inside of a VNC, or we're doing secure shell inside of a VNC. And what it means is we have to use that client, the client provided by the PSM vendor. So the way the administrator does his or her work changes. Okay. And just to be clear, we are using a end-user non-privileged account to authenticate to the PSM session host, and then the session host is initiating that nested session to the target system using the privileged account. So from a security perspective, that's good. But let's talk about a standby. Let's talk about a protocol level proxy. So in this case, look at how it's different. I had to skip ahead a couple slides, and I'll come back to the comparison in a second. In this case, maybe we don't even go to the web portal, Martin. Maybe the admin just opens up whatever client he or she wants to use. If we're talking secure shell, maybe he opens up PuTTY or some other secure shell client and logs on with his normal end user credentials. And so that's a secure shell connection initiated to the privileged session management host. Privileged session management host gets those credentials and looks inside and sees something interesting, because what we did is in PuTTY, we specified our end user account. So this is Bob_user, denoting the fact that this is just a non-privileged everyday account, Bob. But then we added on a few things, and really this is the only thing that has to change. This is the only thing that the administrator has to do differently, Martin, I think is the best way to put it. You want to explain what those extra 2 pieces of information are right there?
Yeah, so what we're doing is really, instead of actually forcing a user down a route of going to a web page or doing something that's unfamiliar to be able to start a session, what you're doing is you're passing a connection string. So whether that's sort of via SSH or via an RDP client, ultimately what you're doing is you're just saying, here's who I am as a user, here's the account I want, here's the system that it's on. And then at the back end, the proxy part, the PSM component, is then responsible for going out, setting up that session, getting back the password, approving it, and doing whatever. So it really sort of takes that legwork out. And plus the nice thing is to the point earlier, when you're sort of pulling up, RDP man or RDC man, you can store these shortcuts in your favorite tool. You don't necessarily, have to go to a single UI.
That's right. So I get freedom of choice with exactly what client I want to use. As long as the client supports the protocol, I use any client I want. And the only thing that changes is, instead of putting in the address of the target system, I always put in the address of the PSM system. And then in the username, I specify the user account that I'll use to authenticate to PSM, but then I also specify the user account that I want to use and the system that I want to use that password on. And so that's what those 2 additional plus strings are. So I'm saying, hey, I'm going to connect to my PSM system right here. I'm going to RDP into my PSM system. Then I'm going to authenticate to it as Bob user. And then what I wanted to do is go out to server 1 and log me on as Bob admin, or as, down here with the PuTTY application, I'm telling it I want to connect to device A as root. So this is really cool. Let me erase that stuff and go back to normal mode. So here I am initiating or connecting to my PSM host either via RDP or secure shell. The session host gets that. It looks inside the username and says, oh, Bob wants to connect to this server over here with RDP as Bob admin. All right. The first thing he's got to do is go look in his entitlements and his approval rules and determine, is Bob allowed to use the Bob admin account on the server, or is Bob allowed to use the root account on this device, right? And that's all handled through what, groups and roles and approval rules and so on, Martin.
Yep, absolutely.
And if we have set up rules that say Bob can do this at any time, so Bob can access this server with this account at any time, why then Bob doesn't even need to go and check the account out, right? Now, on the other hand, if there's an approval in place where we're actually going to require a human or 2 humans to approve that, why then, okay, he's got to change his behavior, what, a little bit then, Martin? He's got to go up to the web portal and say, okay, I want to check out this account for this purpose, maybe with this ticket number for this server, and then wait for that to get approved? How does that work?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, if the user, needs to do, multiple approvals, then, they go to the web portal, they say, hey, this is the account, that I want on this particular system. It then generates workflow that'll then be sent out to, whatever users need to do that approval. And then as soon as, all the approvals are in, then the user is notified via email that they can log on, and they're given a link to go in and, start up their session.
Right. Okay, now, Lawrence, I've been waiting for somebody to ask this question. I was hoping somebody was paying close enough attention and would raise the question. Lawrence says, now doesn't that essentially turn Bob_users credentials into privileged credentials, even if only while going through the PSM? Okay, so let's discuss that. We're operating under the assumption that workstations are compromised. So let's say Bob's workstation here is compromised. There's a keystroke logger on it, for instance. So could the keystroke logger and whatever else rat software is on there see that, Bob has to go through a PSM host? We capture that because if we're looking at the screen, right, we can see, the PSM host is psm.acme.local, and you connect to it over 4438. So he captures that. And he captures the name of the account, and he captures the password of Bob user. See, the bad guy software running here on this endpoint, you know what, I want to make sure my pointing is showing up. So the bad guy software running here on this endpoint is going to be able to capture Bob's username, the coordinates of the privileged session management host, the name of the target account, and you would be able to capture the credentials, the password used to authenticate Bob_user to the PSM host. So what then would prevent the bad guy from then using that information to initiate its own inbound connection to the PSM host? Okay, there's two things. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was going to say, so that this is actually that, would be almost exactly the same if somebody was accessing a web portal and, they're given in a set of credentials, because, with all of these systems, whether you're logging on to a PSM, / PPM management system or any tool, you're going to log on with the credentials that you know. Now, it's ultimately that the bit that protects you and again, this actually might have been what you were going to mention, is our second factor. It's the ability, that it's not just those credentials if they're captured, but the other thing that you can also do, with our product is you can tie the access policy down to specific IP address ranges. So, even if somebody does compromise the credentials and they take it off and they take it to somewhere else and they try to log in, access the PSM system using those credentials, unless it's actually on an approved IP address range, for that policy, it's not going to work.
Okay, now that's true. So if we have rules here on the PSM host that say you have to be at this computer, so now the bad guy from some other computer can't inbound into that, but if we have that host in the background, we could just initiate a connection from this computer to that host that Bob doesn't see. Even then, though, if we're using what I call human factor to present, human presence to factor, not human factor to presence, authentication, then what's going to happen? So when Bob is doing this legitimately, Bob RDPs or secure shells to the PSM host, and if we have automatic approvals in place, then it's just going to happen. But he's going to get a prompt on his phone through Duo Security saying, is that really you? Bob has to have his phone, a completely different system, out-of-band channel to authenticate that. So the bad guy would have to be present at that phone or have otherwise compromised that channel as well in order to get into that session. And so that's really cool. Even if this system is completely compromised, he's still not going to be able to initiate his own session. And I just love that. And that's why I call it human presence two-factor authentication, because we wouldn't want this just to be a token on that system, Martin. You know what I'm saying? If it's a token plugged in here through a USB key or something else like that, we're not proving human presence. Big difference.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is the other thing that would catch that type of thing is the inbuilt threat analytics that we have. So we would actually pick up the fact that there was a login from an unusual location.
Yeah, if it's another endpoint, right, as opposed to leveraging our presence, our malicious presence here on the admin's workstation.
Yep.
Okay, so Matt says, hi, I assume you could use other two-factor solutions. Well, that's a point that I want to make. It's not just that it's two-factor. It's human presence out of channel, out of band, or side channel authentication. What do we mean by that? The human presence means that the human has to do something and confirm his presence or his possession of the other token. In this case, the token is a phone. The other thing is it's side channel or out of band, because think about it here. When we are secure shelling in or RDPing in with the client of our choice, we can't make any assumptions that that client is going to be able to prompt for, say, a one-time password or something else. You know what I'm saying, Martin, on that? And that's why the exact type of two-factor authentication you're using is important. The beauty of something like Duo is that it's transparent. The client here, RDP client or secure shell client here, needs to know nothing about it, that it's even happening. Martin?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, I agree 100%.
Let's see here. Azim says, does Beyond Trust integrate with vaults and he mentions a password vault solution out there. You are a password vault. You don't need to integrate with one. You already are one. So PSM, remember folks, PSM includes PAM. Okay, so let's see here. It seems like there's one other thing I wanted to bring out, but I'll remember whatever that is as we're going along here. So Lawrence is saying, right, two factors, an absolute essential aspect in this case. And let's see, go ahead, Martin. I think you were going to say something.
No,
there.
yeah, I was just actually going to, I was looking at one of the other questions from Chris, that said that, isn't the PSM session host now an incredible goldmine target? And really, I mean, this is, we're looking at a system that potentially is, all it's doing is actually just connecting you through to the endpoints and not releasing the credentials. If you look at password management on its own, which, I mean, our solution is a password manager with built-in session management. Anything that you log on to using your personal credentials that has a collection of accounts, whether it's a system, whether it's a spreadsheet you're opening, whatever it happens to be, that always absolutely is something that, you're putting everything into one place, all your eggs into one basket. But that's why in any solution such as this, security and redundancy, scalability are the most critical aspects. It's a tier 1 system because this is the bit that stands between you and the rest of your infrastructure. And it doesn't only have to be always available, but it absolutely has to be secure as well.
Yeah, but Martin, it is way easy. First of all, a privileged account management system is going to be way more secure just by nature than your endpoint. Because let's think about it. Where are your passwords going to be? Either your passwords are going to be on administrator workstations, and we know how dirty anybody's workstation is. Maybe you give admins 2 different workstations and force them to use them all the time, for separate operations. But regardless, workstations are filthy little beasts that are full of all kinds of malware and other programs. So, your passwords have to be somewhere. Some system has to control your passwords. Or you put your passwords on a hardened appliance that never talks to the internet. No one ever logs onto it and opens up any file that's been downloaded from the internet. So no images, no WAV files. We're not parsing HTML. There's no Flash running on that system. There's no Adobe Acrobat running on that system. Nobody ever even logs onto it interactively. Do you want to talk about that some, Martin? I mean, there's just a huge difference. But, of course, it does matter. Here's another thing. If your privileged account management server is software or a virtual machine, I draw the line there. I love virtualization and I love installable software, but I don't think either one of those is really the right way to go on that. Now, I don't even remember how you guys do it, but you can certainly run this as a hardened physical box, right?
Yeah, well, we actually do both. I mean, to be fair, we actually do virtual appliances as well. Now, you do get a lot of benefits with hardware because then you've got complete segregation, of that entire system. So you can physically put it somewhere secure in the data center. But with virtualization, really, I mean, all of the appliances are, hardened down, to DESA gold standard. They all, incorporate endpoint protection. Like you say, they're not anything that you can log on to. That they are, completely sort of functional boxes that are designed purely for security and scalability. But we'll also hook into HSMs as well. So, when it comes to encrypting the credentials, you can then actually store those encrypted keys, in sort of other physical devices that are purpose-built for that security. So it really, like I said, I can't stress the security enough, because you are putting all your eggs in one basket. So a solution such as this has to be 100% secure.
Yeah, and like Lawrence says, if your privileged account management solution is virtualized, then you're relying on the hypervisor, and you're subject to whoever has privileged access to that thing. So, that's where I come down on that. Let's see here. There's also, I tell you, another important thing to think about here, Martin, is just like different two-factor authentication methods aren't necessarily the same, the point in time at which it happens is also a thing too, isn't it? Because you may want, and there's good reasons, that when you connect to the web portal of your privileged account management solution to do two-factor authentication then. But it's also important if we have, especially if we have automatic approvals, to do that two-factor authentication at the time the remote access session is created. So, you see what I'm getting at there? There's a difference. Sure, when we connect to the web application and check out an account, two-factor may be a good idea at that point. But to protect against bad guys leveraging you over here, it may be also important to do two-factor at the time that session is initiated. So it all depends on what level of what level of risk you're dealing with and what assumptions you're making about the administrator's workstation. Okay, let's get rid of the ink. So differences between hosted and protocol level proxy session management. Now, the security of the privileged credential, in both cases, if they're good solutions, then your chain of custody is maintained. One of the biggest differentiators is the administrative experience. With hosted, the admin has to use the vendor-supplied client. The admin must significantly change their way of doing things. They lose that client choice, and it's not just a preference thing. Their productivity can really be affected. And this is productivity of highly paid, busy people. Whereas a protocol level proxy, the administrator changes nothing except, basically adding plus server plus account to his username when he connects via whatever client he wants to. So this makes it really critical to adoption. Buying a solution is no good if nobody uses it. So in addition, we get to preserve our productivity. Now, the other thing that we haven't talked about is your audit trail can be very different depending on whether you're using hosted PSM or a protocol proxy PSM. Martin, I think you can do a better job explaining that maybe than me, or maybe I'll come back and add some stuff. But basically, if you're VNCing into a box and then creating another RDP or secure shell session from there, it makes it, it's not impossible, but it makes it much, much more difficult and complex to capture metadata, right? Compared to if, in this case, we've got an RDP session coming in or a secure shell session coming in, we're totally tearing that session down to its component messages and then building it back up again and sending it out here. So at this point here, we're not just dealing with a bunch of pixels, we're dealing with the actual keystrokes, menu, or window titles, and all the other text on those, on the windows. Of whatever the admin's doing. Martin?
Yeah, I mean, so and the way that it works, like I say, I mean, is we're actually injecting those credentials in. There's still you've still essentially got, like, if you like, two sessions either side. But one of the benefits of the approach that we've got, when we're actually dealing at the protocol level, means that we're able to start pulling back information directly from the endpoint. So, for example, clicks. Did a person left click? Did they right click? What control did they click? Did they minimize a window? So that there's certain things that we can actually pass back over those virtual RDP channels, for auditing purposes. So it really does provide a more extensible way of doing it. But ultimately, the approaches, are very, very similar. When you do look at the, sort of the hosted and the protocol proxy way, but it's really, I would say the big difference about protocol proxy is the fact that, it's clientless, it's easy to use, you get a far better adoption from your users, plus also that there's less moving parts. You're not, as I say, dealing with like sort of VNC on one side and sort of RDP on the other. I mean, it really is, you are actually sort of just dealing in one area, which makes it far easier to audit and more accurately to be able to reconstruct those audit recordings.
The other thing that you pointed out is when you're doing stuff like VNC and inside of that RDP, you might have pixel limitations and so on. Somebody had asked, what about how responsive it is? Let's see, where's that question? Ricky says, with protocol level proxy, while the privileged, no, maybe that one scrolled off the screen, but they're basically asking, what's the, there it is. Chris says, with nested tunnels, is latency adversely affected with like RDP or secure shell inside of VNC? So in either case, whether it's hosted or protocol proxy, we do have somebody in between, but I don't think either one is likely to slow you down much, but
it actually does.
Huh?
So just to interrupt you there, so I was involved very heavily years ago with a solution that actually did VNC, and what they did was that they basically tunneled that VNC over SSH, and there was a huge impact. I would like to say almost like a 4 or 5x impact that you would actually get in terms of the amount of bandwidth that a session would take. Definitely, it made a big difference in that case.
So that's good to know. But the other thing that I was considering is that you know how remote access can sometimes be a little herky-jerky just with mouse, pixel, eye-hand coordination. You really need good performance in order to have an experience where you feel like the program you're dealing with and the buttons you're clicking on are really there in front of you. And I know it creates quite a barrier for me to even, maybe it's just me, but even to think cognitively and to diagnose problems if I feel like I'm working with it almost feels like you're working with really, really thick gloves on, right? If you're doing nested sessions inside of each other. Like I hate RDPing into one box and from that box RDPing into another, even if I can avoid it. But going from VNC to RDP is even, there's going to be a loss of fidelity there is the best that I can come up with. And it's a subjective thing, right? But it is a thing, though. You can't deny it.
Yep. No, I agree.
Okay, so the other aspect to keep in mind is that one advantage of the hosted is that it can potentially support any method of accessing a remote system. I mean, I don't know, here's a crazy idea. We could put 5250 terminal emulation client potentially on that hosted box and give you, what is the term, managed access to your mainframe environment. Now, with protocol proxy, if we support secure shell and RDP, then that's what we support. But there is a way that you could still provide that through some type of jump box, right, Martin, where, okay, we've got some client program we want to control access to, so what we're going to do is go to the jump box idea for that particular application, and we're going to let people check out an account for RDPing into that jump box to access that application. Is that doable?
Yeah, that's actually a really common use case, for, as you mentioned, you've got different protocols, you've got 5250, which is like iSeries, 3270, which is mainframe. All of those protocols are actually protocols that we have roadmap that we're actually going to be passing natively for our proxy. But one of the things that a lot of companies do is they will use, in the exact scenario you just mentioned, I mean, you would RDP through to a jump host. It would automatically check out a managed set of credentials for a mainframe. It would launch an emulator, play in those credentials, and then log you in. So effectively, you're using RDP, 3389 between you and the jump host. And then from the jump host, then you're using your 3270, for a terminal emulator. But the benefit is the credentials don't get released, plus everything is still recorded in exactly the same way as, if you'd been looked at the native protocol.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see here. Bottom line then is that, we've got to deal with our current risks, whether that's pass the hash or other credential artifact risks. We've got to make the assumption of compromised endpoints. We've got to build out an environment that deals with the fact that the bad guys have figured out how to achieve lateral movement, that they're very sophisticated with fileless malware. And to do that, what it really means is the password just should never ever touch an administrative workstation or any system. The password for these privileged accounts needs to remain on highly secured, zone 0 systems. And if we're going to provide automated approvals to those accounts, then we need human presence, out-of-band, two-factor authentication. Not just any two-factor authentication, but it's important when the two-factor happens and the type of two-factor. It's, protocol level proxy is what preserves your freedom of client, your administrative productivity, which then turns around and helps your adoption and compliance. Plus, you're going to be able to get richer auditing and metadata. So let's actually see a clientless protocol level proxy in action. I'm going to make you the presenter, Martin.
Okay, perfect.
By the way, a number of people are asking, what about dependence reliability? What if the PSM box is down?
No, that's a great question. And that's, like I said, this is a tier 1 system, so that's always going to be a concern. So there's multiple levels of redundancy. So, the architecture itself means that you can have multiple appliances, each one of them fully redundant, so, I mean, you can potentially lose any one of them and not, lose access. We also have the ability to be able to, work with resources in the cloud as well. So we got appliances that work in Azure, AWS, et cetera, so that way, even if all of your on-prem, is not available, you can still log on to your cloud-based environment. And then further still, we actually, have a SaaS-based application which is coming out shortly in a couple of months. And we're building the ability to be able to synchronize account credentials to that. So you've got a true break glass capability so that even if you lose access to your entire infrastructure, or again, I mean, a great use case, let's say your network firewalls go down and all your stuff's on-prem, your network administrator's at home, how does he actually get in to get the password to fix the firewalls? That's always a very common use case. So that's why it's important, to be able to synchronize that information outside the firewall very securely, either in your own, devices or in our premises, to give you that redundancy. But yeah, pretty well covered in every way, shape, or form there. All right, so let me actually just show you really sort of how the system works. I mean, I'll give you an example of the web interface. So you've got a point of reference to see exactly how a user might actually sort of log on to a web interface. And then what we'll do is talk about how the user might just use their native tools. So first of all, we have the ability to be able to obviously check in, check out accounts. If you're using these access to a password, then obviously that can be done. Or we got something which we call, one-click, which allows the user to be able to simply go in, click a single button to be able to retrieve, the password or to be able to open the session. And again, this is all done by policy. If I set my policy up to, to say you need a password, you need to get an approval to get the password. All you'll see is the ability to be able to open up a session. So we can do things in a web UI, we can very easily sort of find things, sort of categorized as required. But one of the things we mentioned was, part of the issue with any sort of deployment such as this is user adoption. Because, people like doing things the way that they're doing them. They don't like to use different tools or, fundamentally changing the way that they're doing things. And so what we do is, through these, the ability to be able to actually set up these connection strings. So an example, here's one I've got here. This allows me to be able to connect through the PSM system without ever actually having to hit that web interface. So potentially I could just go in, I'm in actually mremote ng. This is actually now going to load up my session. This will actually sort of log me in. But as I say, I'm not really having to do anything in terms of, as far as actually sort of trying to hunt and find it. It's all within the system, where I need it. Now, the other thing, as Randy said, is that I could also do two-factor with this. So I could actually sort of push out something, to my phone or wherever it happens to be, or to like an SMS, to be able to authorize me to go in. So it's very easy to get in. Now, we can also do this, for example, with like SSH. So let's say, for example, I actually pick up an SSH one. Actually, it's not loading up here. Hang on, let me actually try that directly through PuTTY. Oh, there we go. It's actually loading. So basically, what this has done is this has actually sort of taken me straight into an SSH session. Now, the key thing is we haven't actually, at any point, given actually the credentials, and that we haven't actually sort of put the password down. Now, the way that works is, let me actually just show you here. When the proxy, has been notified that you need access to a resource, it actually sends down a unique one-time key. That key is actually then sent back to the proxy. So, in the case of the RDP or SSH session, that's, when we're doing the one-time connect key, that's actually internal to the proxy. For the web interface, that will invoke, Microsoft Remote Desktop, client or whatever, and then it opens up a connection on that, that inside, and then you're able to, we inject the credentials inside, so that way that nothing has actually come down to the desktop of the workstation. You haven't got any password, the host name, the username, nothing has actually come down. So as far as the user is concerned, they're logged straight into the system, but it's actually going through our proxy. Now, the really cool thing is I can actually sort of log in as an administrator. So let's actually log in as mcanard admin. And so put that into our BT lab. Now, the nice thing is I can actually, receive notification to say that somebody's actually gone into these sessions, but I can also monitor them as well. So if we take a look at the SSH session, you see that I can actually see exactly what is going on. If the user, happens to type anything, so if I type in, I don't know, who am I, for example, you see that that's there, ID, so somebody can be monitoring what I'm doing. We also track the keystrokes as well. So, if there is actually, if I'm actually, let's say, for example, your SIM gets notification to say that somebody's executed this command, or they're running this application, or even somebody's actually found, that they looked at a piece of information, they tried to like cache out a file with credit card numbers, then this is actually not only log in what you're typing, but it's also log in everything that the user sees as well. You see, now this is all indexed. So I could actually, if you've got something that's been compromised, I can search by keystroke. I can put that in, whether it's something the user typed, what they saw, it'll find the sessions and it'll take me straight in. Now, if they've done something nefarious, I can hit log. Now the user can no longer do anything in the session. Believe me, I'm actually typing here. It says here at the top, your session's been logged. See, so at this point, I can no longer do anything. Now, if I sort of pop this down at the bottom and unlock it, you see now it's unlocked. I can go in and I can do whatever I need to do within the interface. So this allows me to be able to effectively insert a pause in terms of what the user's doing. So, I mean, rather than just going in and saying arbitrarily, I'm going to terminate this particular session, I can lock it. I can find out what's going on. I haven't killed the SSH session, it's still running. And if everything's fine, I can, unlock it and, the user continues on as they're doing. I can do exactly the same thing with RDP. So as you can see here, I park this down in the corner. Here's my RDP session. Everything that I'm doing here, if I'm, opening up Windows or whatever, everything is now mirrored on the session. I can see what's happening, including, all of the mouse movements, if I sort of wiggle my mouse down here, and importantly, everything that I'm clicking as well. The fact that I've left-clicked on File Explorer, I've, opened up the Start menu. I mean, whatever I do in here is actually recorded. Again, index as well. I can search on it. If I want to lock it, see, I've now locked that session. Okay, so the nice thing about this is, this is allowing you to be able to do something nicely. So instead of just saying, okay, right, I'm just going to lock it, and the user's now calling the help desk saying, well, what is going on? I can't get into my system. You now have the ability to be able to give information to the user. You can customize this PNG. Have your customer logo, say, your session's been locked, suspicious activity, please contact the help desk on blah, blah, blah. So this gives you like the ability to be able to talk to your users. If everything's fine, we unlock it and the user can do exactly what they're doing before. Everything works. So this is, to say, one of the benefits that you get is that active session monitoring. Now, if we actually sort of close down these sessions, let's actually close down this one as well. So
you ought to add a button beside the terminate that says deploy handcuffs or something cool like that.
Hey, absolutely. Well, I've often thought that there should be something that actually says deploy electric shock or something.
Yeah.
So when you really actually terminate, maybe you actually really do terminate. This has been a 7-1 incident that we actually need to get rid of the employee. So
send high voltage packet. Okay, I'll shut up. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, no worries. No, that's good. So what I've done here is I've closed out of these sessions. You can see they're no longer active. But now if I go into the replay session area, here are the sessions again. So as an auditor, I can go in and open these up, and I can actually start seeing what I've done. So I can actually start playing back, the session itself. I can change my playback speeds. It actually looks like this one actually wasn't a particularly long session at all. Let me find one here. You do a refresh. Let's take this one. There we go. All right, so this is the RDP session I was running. I can play. I can search for activity. So let's say, for example, if I, wanted to be able to find, a particular thing. I mean, let's say, for example, I type in server. Oops, you can type right. You see, open server manager. I can actually click on that, and it takes me straight to that point. You see, so I mean, I can basically search all of that activity. So I can search right across the board, all of my recorded sessions to say, show me anything with this particular keystroke or application the users run. And then when I open up the session, it takes me straight to that point. I click, and I go in there. Now I can, also I can move backwards and forwards on the timeline. For forensics, I can also create a snapshot as well. So once I do the snapshot, that now creates a JPEG, which of course I don't have anything to open my JPEG with, surprisingly enough. But believe me, I mean, it does look pretty good when it does work. I mean, what the JPEG does is it actually creates a screenshot of the entire page, plus also it adds metadata at the bottom. So it actually tells you, who recorded it. It tells you, who exported it. And more importantly, with all of this stuff, it's all about the audit trail. So you can see here, I've actually telling me that I viewed it. It also tells me, that I actually exported that frame at that point. So an administrator couldn't actually, you couldn't have a rogue administrator go in and try to, use information that's there and export it and take it out and use it, in some other way, shape, or form. So ultimately, what we're doing here is we're providing a mechanism to log you on using managed credentials. Now, as I say, I mean, fundamentally, it is a password management system. I mean, if we actually go up to the sort of core functionalities, that's what it does. It's password management. But the session management is part of that process. So that's why we never charge for session management. It's built in because, to me, the best password management system is one where you never actually have to give the password out for. So the other thing that we can also do, I just want to point out, is also applications as well. So that was one thing that Randy alluded to when we're sort of talking about, doing like 3270 applications. So got an environment here. Again, I'm going to log on as my user account. I'm going to do this one for the web interface. Now, what I got is the ability to be able to go in and not only launch any Windows application, but I can also launch any web application as well. So, for example, it could be a cloud application. Let's say, for example, I want to run my AWS account. I've got a managed account, J Perkins, in AWS, and I want to be able to open up a session to that. So, by doing this, what this does is that it actually opens up a remote app session. It's now launching the web page, playing in the credentials, and as you can see, I'm now logged in. Now, this is you can monitor this, you can log everything that happens in exactly the same way. So think of any sort of, external SaaS application, internal web application you might use. We can do the same thing for databases. So if you think of like a database account, if I actually try to, let me just actually check in my account here so I can use it. Let's go back to new request, take my databases, and let's do my SQL Server Management Studio with SQL DBA 1. So same sort of approach. So I need an application session for this. And what this will do is this will launch SQL Server Management Studio and play in those credentials so that now they haven't been exposed. But the cool thing is in exactly the same way as before, all of this is being recorded. Everything is being logged. I can go in, I can lock the session, as you saw we do on the other RDP session. It's really extending that sort of benefit to everything that that we're doing within here. So
hey, Martin,
this is yeah, please.
Quick question on that with applications. I believe that there's a lot of end user applications we should be doing this with, like maybe a cash management application from our bank that just isn't that secure. Do you have any clients that do this, that actually use this for end user stuff?
People use it for all sorts of stuff. It's fairly easy to configure, so we don't always necessarily get to hear about all of the really freakish ones, but certainly, I've seen it used for everything from like the usual thing, like vSphere. It could be FileZilla. Kiosks as well. Kiosk applications. Where people actually need to be able to log on automatically into a UI. And perform certain functions. There's sort of many different things, but the bottom line is really any Windows application can be launched. Now we can do the same thing for SSH as well. I don't have any examples within here, but we can actually launch any or exec any SSH command in the SSH interface and play credentials in. So if you're using SQL Plus or some sort of sort of DBMS, wherever it happens to be, you've got that ability to be able to record all that activity and also provide access without giving access to the password.
Nice.
So, as I say, this is really sort of around the password management. Now, one of the things I just want to be able to kind of run through, just in terms of sort of where we are, from a product perspective. We talked a little bit about sort of access policy, but this is something that is absolutely key in my mind because, I think the days have gone where we used to be able to give access to Bob, to log on between, the hours of, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Things are very, very much more dynamic these days because you have to look at the context. What if Bob has a daytime job and ordinarily he accesses these machines, but he also covers Firecall. Now we don't want to keep on, having to change the security policy every couple of weeks, every time he does Firecall duty. So, what I think is important is to have an access policy that says, here's a group of users, here's a group of accounts I'm going to give them access to, and here's the access policy that relates it. So in this case, as you can see, we can actually restrict it down to a particular location. So in the case of Firecall, you can only access these accounts if you're coming from the VPN concentrator. If you're coming from anywhere else, forget about it, because these are file call accounts. Maybe we're actually going to limit the amount of times, or the times of the day when you can access these particular accounts, the days of the week. Maybe even via a calendar. If you have contractors that have to be able to go in, and those contractors need to be able to work for specific periods, maybe you need an end date to the policy. When it comes down to specific policies for particular actions, like I was saying earlier, it could be that you give RDP access auto-approved, but maybe you need an approval to view the password. So that, to one of the questions that came up earlier, people said, okay, well, what happens if we can, if a proxy goes down, how do we access the system out of band? Well, in that case, you might have to say, okay, I need the password, in which case somebody would have to then approve it. You now got the password, and you can now log on directly. So, this allows you to be able to cover all use cases. As I mentioned before, any Windows application, web page. The example here is vSphere, obviously. This is the ability to be able to use those credentials, log them in, and then obviously log and record all of that activity. Same thing for SSH. If you think of applications, what about the ability to be able to run a backup script? Sort of overnight, or maybe you actually have people that are part-time administrators that need to be able to do certain things like NS lookup, but you don't want to give them shell access. So this is a way where you can actually condense those sorts of features into a menu and actually drive a user very gracefully through it without ever having to actually, say, give them the password to that application. Reporting and analytics, is absolutely crucial as well. As I mentioned before, it's not, the reason that people put these things in initially is because of compliance. An auditor is saying, look, I want to be able to, you tell me all the people that logged onto the system between this day and this day. Well, that's great, but then obviously operationally, that there is a security aspect to it as well. You want it to be able to improve your security. So by being able to go out, scan your environment, to be able to identify where all your accounts are, when the password was last changed, does it expire, is it an admin? You can even sort of identify backdoor accounts. Where's my low-hanging fruit? To see what should I be fixing first. You can actually even look at your upcoming password changes. So that ultimately, if you've got periods of time which might be busier than others, maybe you can actually adjust your policy to flatten that out, so you're not trying to do a DOS on your own system. Rule usage. Do I have appropriate rules? Are people accessing my systems, appropriately? Are my service accounts managed? So these are all things that are important. And to the point that came up earlier, that, where we're saying, okay, well, what if somebody then actually took those credentials and they logged on somewhere else? This is where it actually comes into anomaly detection. This is where you need to be able to say, what, here's something which actually looks unusual. Somebody hasn't logged on from this workstation before. Maybe it's outside of my security perimeter. Or maybe it's inside my security perimeter, but to say it's just an unusual event. So these are all things that, that are pretty critical, to actually call out. So ultimately, where we look at the differences, between, our solution, which is password safe and it does, password management and session management, it's that adaptive workflow control. It's intelligent ability to be able to take that just-in-time, set of credentials, if you like, what you're trying to access, and to be able to give access according to what you're able to do. The scanning, the data warehouse, the smart rules. This is all stuff, which again is absolutely sort of crucial. The last one, most important, is ease of use, which is vital for this. Don't take our word for it. Take a look at the analysts. If you look at Forrester, they actually put us ahead of all of our competitors in the last Forrester wave. And ultimately, we've obviously sort of covered the demo. I think, at this point, this is really where I think I want to sort of pass it back over. I think there's another poll to be able to go in. There we go, which is flashed up on the screen, and maybe we can sort of do some Q&A.
So let's do Q&A. I've got a number of people asking about how much storage the recordings take up, which kind of throws me. There must be something I'm missing, because to me storage is like limitlessly cheap nowadays, but it's a concern of a bunch of people here. So
no, it's a valid question. Yeah, so ultimately, I mean, storage is always going to depend on what you do. It's one of those it depend questions. But as an average, an SSH session will run you at about 25 kilobytes per minute. An RDP session about 350 kilobytes per minute. You know, it's very, very small. We're only recording movement, so it's not like a video file that you can just pick up and play back. We compress it 6 times. It's AES 256 encrypted, and we're basically compressing the raw data. I mean, it's not a video file. So, you know, they're very small. But there is also a lot of items on there, you know, that does allow you to be able to, you know, to actually set up archive as well. So you can actually post out to archive servers as well. So there's a whole data storage management component to this, which is built in.
Okay, now also on the recorded sessions, folks are asking about the security of it. Like Myrick is asking about that, as well as the log. So where are the logs stored? How are they secured? How are the recordings secured?
Yep, so the logs and even the recordings are actually stored on the hardened appliance itself. I mean, you can use an archive server to store them, but as I mentioned, I mean, all of the recordings, regardless of whether it's SSH or RDP, are all AES 256 encrypted. You can play them back unless it's actually through the system itself. You know, so by design, you know, we've made it secure so that there's a complete audit trail over who is actually accessed and who has actually played back any recordings.
Oh, that's good. Peter asks, I thought RDP was just a bunch of mouse movements and keyboard entries. How can the tool know that I opened Server Manager in a RDP session?
So what we do is we actually push down a small component that actually does auditing. So within the context of a session, what we do is we're tying into sort of Windows events. And as I mentioned, what we're doing is we're passing that through to the proxy through one of the spare RDP channels, you know, so one of the virtual channels, and so that becomes part of the auditing. So in the same way as, you know, recording the keystrokes, that there is a component which is actually pushed out at session time, which actually does that local login and pushes all that back, or pulls it back, I should say, you know, to the audit database.
Byron would like to know, can the logs be erased by the admin?
No, they can't. No, I mean, there's no ability to be, I mean, you can archive them, but, you know, the security comes down to, obviously, the physical security of where you're storing them. If you're going to put them on an archive server and you give somebody access to it, yeah, sure, they could delete a file, because, I mean, each one of these are separate files. But when it comes to the logs, again, that's protected within the database, which is protected by this, you know, this appliance, you know, that people don't have access to. So it isn't possible for people to go in and just delete activity.
Andrew asks, can the activity be exported to a SIM tool?
Absolutely, yes. So we integrate with just about every SIM that's out there: Splunk, ArcSight, QRadar, Sentinel. I mean, there's connectors for all of them, and we can dynamically, you know, sort of push all that data out to the SIMs and interact with them.
Ricky asks, would you consider organizing a session to show more about the adaptive workflow feature? So that's a good idea for the future. Let's see, how long, do you have control? Several folks are asking something similar to what Elise says here. Do you have control over how long the recordings and other information is saved?
Yeah, so that's actually part, I mean, so there is a retention period that you can set, and again, that's really, you know, controls, you know, as to where it gets sent to the archive server, and that could be based upon days, or it could even be sent to, or set to like disk space, for example, you know, when you're down to X percentage disk space.
We lost you, Randy.
Oh, okay, no, Randy.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You know, idiots push the mute button and forget. Jeremy, at least this idiot. Anyway, Jeremy says that it seemed kind of slow when you were logging onto the web portal. Is that typical performance? You know, it's a demo system, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually running in an Azure environment, so this isn't actually sort of running on my appliance. This is just actually running on a couple of Azure VMs. And obviously, we don't put a lot of resources onto them. So yeah, it is a lot quicker in a production environment on the appliance.
Let's see here. Bill asks, can servers be put into groups so that DLs are notified when someone logs on to them?
Yeah. So what you can do is, when you have the servers, you can actually send out notification emails for particular actions. Whether it's somebody that's making a request, they're logging on. We can even actually send out notifications to specific DLs if you are. If a user performs a certain activity. So it's not even just to say someone's logged onto the host, but if someone's ran try to execute kill on this host or shut down or whatever, we can actually send out a notification to specific DLs.
So Ricky said, so the privileged account needs to be rotated by a vault too. He's saying, so that means both the PSM and the password vault need to be integrated. And that's kind of the point I was trying to make earlier when I showed the PPM being a component, really, of privileged session management, that they work hand in hand, if not even maybe considered all one thing.
Yep, that's correct. I mean, that these are, the proxies can be split off, so you can have obviously multiple proxies, but ultimately, it's one system. It's not like a separate module that you have to add on. It's all built in. It's all part and parcel of the same solution.
Let's see here. He's saying, Ricky, with protocol level proxy, while the privileged account password is protected, the privileged user account name is still known by the untrusted endpoint. Yeah, we agree with that. But if anybody thinks that usernames are secret, they need to do a little bit of research into freely available hacker tools and scanners. Usernames are not private and are not secret, and which ones are privileged and which ones aren't is not secret either. I'll just leave it at that. Let's see here. So the same person was saying that if the privileged user account becomes known, it becomes an account of interest for brute force. But good luck trying to keep usernames secret. Hey, Martin?
Well, yeah, and apart from anything else, part of the benefit of a proxy is that you've actually got a separation between the user and the endpoint. The only thing that can talk to the endpoint is the proxy, and the only thing the user can talk to is the proxy. So, even if a user does actually know what the account is on the endpoint, they don't have access to it.
Andrew asks, can access request approvals be one from one group and let's see, how's he say? I'm just going to read it exactly how it is here.
I know what he means, actually.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Multi-tier approvals. So that's actually something that's coming. So at the end of the year. So the use case is, the person's manager approves it, and then it goes off to group B, or maybe like the system owner to approve it afterwards. So yeah, that's multi-tier, and that's actually coming shortly.
Got it. Andrew also asks, are APIs available to allow third-party ticketing systems to interact with the process?
Yeah, the APIs are free. The public APIs. It's certainly we've made it very easy for not only our customers to interface to other systems, but also we work with a lot of vendors as well to build integration directly into their solutions, into this product.
Is the software or appliance developed to a specific EAL level or common criteria specification?
Yep, so actually the appliance is actually going under common criteria certification right now, so watch your space. So it is actually that there is is going under the security protection profile, and that's should be ready later on this year. It's underway.
Bill asks, are those action logs archivable for FIM reporting and PCI compliance? I think we already answered that. The answer is yes on that. Yeah. A few folks would like to know, how's the product licensed? What's the licensing basis?
Licensed by asset, so we just, so in terms of the PSM side, there's no charge for PSM. So, the only thing that you're effectively paying for is password management. Everything else that you saw, everything you saw on the slides, that's all included in that price. There's no extras for API, no extras for PSM, no extras for threat analytics, that's all in there. So yeah, I mean that's so when you look at when I'm saying by asset, it's by endpoint. So an endpoint could be a database instance. So you might have 3 instances on a physical server. Each one of those is, if you like, a licensed endpoint. It could be router, firewall, operating system, hypervisor, whatever. So it's
Robert asked, would it be possible? Would it be compatible with Cisco network devices?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we tie into that, tie into TACACS as well. Use TACACS Plus, for example, to to be able to manage accounts. To be able to log yourself directly on to to a Cisco router, for example, using your AD credentials. But yeah, so yeah, fully compatible.
Saravanan asks, how to automate to stop someone using custom code when they do something wrong. So Saravanan, are you talking about like somebody being able to download or supply a custom application and running that under the managed accounts authority, or what? Sunil asks, can it also alert when a remote PowerShell session is established?
So, I mean, the alerts, I mean, it'll alert on whatever you run within the system itself, so, that most of the session-based alertings are based around SSH, that the current, there aren't any alerts at the moment that'll tell you, for example, if somebody invokes PowerShell within an RDP session. Now that is actually coming, but at the moment, you can alert on, whether a session has started, whether it's been, requested, approved, and what have you, or whether, somebody invokes a specific command within, like a, the concept, the confines of an SSH session.
I didn't read far enough down with Saravan's questions. There's four questions in a row comprising one sentence, and that is what they were referring to is, could you have Beyond Trust monitor what they're doing and alert you if a certain window comes up or they type in a certain command instead of you having to watch it manually or review it manually?
So yeah, I mean, and that's what I was covering really, which is, I mean, we can do that on SSH. RDP is actually coming. The ability to be able to put in effectively a keyword, like a simple regex or something that you want to be able to say, I want to search for this word or this, application, for example, that's been invoked, and I want to be able to alert or actually, cause an action. So, one of the things that we can do when we actually do it on SSH, for example, when we actually look at the what the user's typing, is not only sending out an email, we can also interact with the session. So we can automatically lock a session if a particular keyword is invoked. So by definition, when we pull that into RDP, that will also be available in there at the same time.
Matt says, what about local administrator account management, like auto-rotating passwords on them, ensuring the passwords are unique, and so on?
Yep, we can do that. Yep, any operating system. We also have another unique capability in that area where we have a client, an optional client that you can push out that actually allows you to be able to pull password changes down to the endpoint. So if you think typically when you make password changes, the system's got to, push password changes out. And with desktops and laptops, and they're being shut down, they're being moved around, people are working from home, so it's like a moving target. So the agent has a heartbeat that actually talks back to the password safe server, and if there's a password change that's queued up for it, it'll pull it down and invoke it immediately. So yeah, we got really good coverage in the desktop space.
Are there plans to add WS-MAN or WinRM protocol level proxy?
Not at the moment. I wouldn't rule it out. As I mentioned, I mean, we're looking at sort of Telnet 3270, 5250. That there may well be other protocols we can add. I mean, that's the benefit of this type of a proxy. I mean, it's really, you're sitting in the middle of a data stream. You're able to pull that stuff out. Part of the complexity is really just all more around, the reconstruction of it, for playback.
Here's another one. Can the level of access to Cisco devices be changed for a user by moving the AD credentials from one AD group to another, as in integration with TACOX?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that you could do with that is by moving the credentials from one group to another, you're now able to invoke a different access policy. So when you're looking at the adaptive workflow control earlier, that's tied into the connection profile, which is that list of commands that you could actually type or not, as the case may be. So, you might say that once that account actually moves, if you sort of drag it from one group to another, now all of a sudden it is actually sort of part of a different policy set, with a different set of commands that you can potentially run on that endpoint. And that's part of the benefit of this is clientless command blocking. So if you've got a router firewall where, normally you couldn't install a client-based, tool for delegation, this allows you to be able to stop people from messing around with routing tables and that sort of thing inadvertently.
I think we might want to clarify one thing. When you're talking about the endpoint, being able to push the password to it, let's be clear, that is an agent on the endpoint of the system being protected, not the endpoint of the administrator's workstation. Because Saravanan is asking here, when the password is being pushed to the endpoint, where is it exactly stored for that session? So we're not talking about pushing a password out to the endpoint of the admin.
So to be clear, session management requires absolutely no agent. There's no agent on the host, no agent on the client, period, at all, ever. The only time that you may want to use an optional agent is if you want to pull password changes onto a workstation where you're managing local accounts. Like an itinerant laptop or something that's being moved around, or people are working out of airports and you want to be able to change an account on that laptop. It's almost impossible for a central system to be able to try and push a change to it, especially if that user rarely connects to the corporate network. So by having an optional client, it allows it to be able to pull a password change down as and when required. But that's got absolutely nothing to do with session management. That's just pure password management.
That'd be like the football laptop, right, that has the codes for nuclear launch.
There you go. That's the one. Yep.
Let's see here. Do you have apps for check-in and check-out instead of using the web UI?
No, there aren't apps. I say, I mean, there's no clients. I mean, no separate applications. I mean, we do tie in, obviously, to third-party systems. Whether it's Jira, ServiceNow, Remedy, CA. So we tie into all the sort of major ticket systems. But the user would enter actually into the web interface.
Azim says, do you have tools to perform discovery around how service accounts might be being used, multiple types of logons, config files, which would be required to rotate passwords?
Yes, absolutely. So with the scanner, it's actually able to go out and enumerate all the Windows services, and they enumerate scheduled tasks, pulls them in. We have the ability to be able to tie that back to managed accounts, so that if, let's say, for example, you've got a set of services, Windows services, that are being started up by somebody's personal account. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they couldn't be bothered to get a change ticket in and get a proper service account in AD, so they just use their own credentials. We can pick that up, and basically what we do is we then tie them together, so that if you then change the managed account password, we will then automatically rotate those the passwords on those services, and even restart them if need be. And this is the same with scheduled tasks.
A couple of folks have wondered, do you have other authentication methods besides Duo on the roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, so Duo is just an example of a push technology that you could use for this direct connect. So the proxy, I mean, if you when you use like like a normal web interface, we're hooking with any radius-based proxy. We do X509 smart card certificates. We can do SAML. So like federated login, ADFS. I mean, there's multiple ways, that you can log onto the system. So Duo is, just because of the way that when you're not using a web interface, you're reliant upon using, for example, just like, the IDP interface. So we can prompt you for a password, but there's no way to dynamically prompt you for a token. So that's why in those sorts of examples, when you're using what we call like the direct connect, like the connection string, that's when you would actually typically use a push type of technology. But we support, pretty well all the push ones that are out there.
Okay, well, that was a lot of questions. We appreciate everybody being so interested and staying with us to get those answered. Looks like this was valuable to you folks. I certainly hope it was. And Martin, thank you, and Sarah and the other folks at Beyond Trust for making today's real training for free possible.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the time.
Have a good day, everybody. We'll be sending you a link to the recording and other information. Take care, and bye-bye for now.